I want to show you a few photographs. Now, some of these I think are probably accurate photographs, natural photographs, and some of them may have been edited a little bit for emphasis. But as we look at these photographs, you're going to see that there is one thing that stands out from all of the others. In this particular one, there's the pea in the pod that looks a little bit different because it is a different color from the rest of them. Let's go to the next picture. Okay, it showed up a lot better on my computer screen, but can you tell that there's one locker that stands out from the others? Okay, in this whole wall of orange, there's this one door that is yellow. Let's do the next picture. Okay, one chicken is different, or one egg that's different. And then the next picture, it's even more so clear, okay, that there's one that's standing out even more than the rest. One orange, and then one orange that's more oranger than the other oranges, right? And I particularly like this one, because this is going to lead into well to what we're going to be doing today, is that you've got the one that looks different from all the others. And you know that in this case, you got to get rid of the one, or the others are going to look just like it, correct? Because the one in the middle is rotten. And this one right here, which, again, this picture doesn't have quite the clarity up on the screen here, but there's those cherries, but it's got the one raspberry-looking one right in the midst of it. Now, when you see this, this is a technique that causes emphasis on something where it is, you have an item, but if you bracket it on both sides or surround it with things that look completely different but are all uniform to one another, it causes that one thing to stand out. The one image pops because of how everything else around it looks the same except for that one. You happen to notice that which is unique. It stands out. Now today, we are going to be going to Mark's Gospel. You can begin turning your Bibles if you'd like to. Mark 14 is where we're going to be. And we are going to see that this technique that we've seen photographically here is something that has been around for thousands of years, where you can place emphasis on something when it is between two things that are the same as each other, but are opposite from that which you're wanting to focus on. Now, in Mark, we have been going through the Gospel of Mark, just kind of chapter by chapter, verse by verse, with the exception of the last 2 weeks, as we bounced around to the Palm Sunday passage and then to the Easter passage. So don't get whiplash as we go back and forth. We're getting back into the chronology today. We did Mark 13 3 weeks ago, which Jesus was talking about the signs of the end of the age and when he's going to come back, the things that are going to indicate that his coming is getting closer and closer. Now, we reach a transition now in in chapter 14, and his conversation is going to be a lot more focused on his interaction with the disciples, and there's going to be a lot more personalness to this interaction, as well as events are going to be unfolding that are going to accelerate to send him to the cross. Now, I'm going to read through the first 11 verses of Mark 14, and I want you to be looking for a literary representation of what we just saw on the screen, of how something is emphasized because of what is on both sides of it, okay? So, Mark 14, verse 1. Now the Passover and unleavened bread were 2 days away, and the chief priests and scribes were seeking how to seize him, that's Jesus, by stealth and kill him. For they were saying, not during the festival, otherwise there might be a riot of the people. While he was in Bethany, at the home of Simon the leper, and reclining at the table, there came a woman with an alabaster vial of very costly perfume of pure nard, and she broke the vial and poured it over his head. But some were indignantly remarking to one another, why has this perfume been wasted? For this perfume might have been sold for over 300 denarii, and the money given to the poor. And they were scolding her. But Jesus said, let her alone. Why do you bother her? She has done a good deed to me. For you will always have the poor with you, and whenever you wish, you can do good to them. But you do not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for the burial. Truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be spoken of in memory of her. Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went off to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. They were glad when they heard this and promised to give him money, and he began seeking how to betray him at an opportune time. Did you notice the bracketing there? This is actually what is called a Markin Sandwich. Okay? In the book of Mark, he uses this literary technique multiple times where he takes a scene and then inserts something else into it. If you remember the story of Jairus, the synagogue ruler, and how he came to Jesus saying, please heal my daughter. And then in the middle of that scene, as Jesus is on his way to go and heal this girl, there's a woman comes up and she's got an issue with bleeding, and she falls down before Jesus and interrupts the scene. And then as soon as that's done, he goes back to the healing of Jairus' daughter. Okay, that sort of thing. Mark does this over and over again, and here we have the sandwich as well. Okay, where it's bracketed on both sides by this sinister plot of the Jewish leaders and how Judas is now a part of this plot. So you've got this darkness on both sides of it. And then you've got this beautiful scene in the middle. Now, just a little bit more about the darkness part. The Jewish festival of Passover was one of 3 times that all the Jewish men in the realm needed to come together and needed to come to Jerusalem to worship. And oftentimes their families would come. So Jerusalem, which I've heard differing statistics, but probably 50, 60,000 people, maybe more than that, typical population would double, triple, or even quadruple in size during this festival. So if you think about those of you who ride motorcycles, okay, how big is Sturgis, right? Sturgis is not that big, but when you come together with all those motorcycles, suddenly the population just explodes. Well, it's that same sort of idea here with Passover. A community, not a small city at all, but it just grows enormous as all these people are flocking to the town. Jewish people coming to the Jewish capital for a Jewish holiday. Well, now with Jesus on the scene, they're thinking, is this the Jewish Messiah? And so the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, the chief priests, all those people are thinking, there is no way we are going to try and seize Jesus during this time because there could be a riot. You get a lot of people together, there's a lot more chance for volatility. And so they think, we're going to wait till after this festival. And Passover is not just one day. There's Passover itself, Passover proper, is a one-day celebration, followed by 7 days of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So about an 8-day holiday, week-long or so, holiday. And they're thinking, wait till the crowds have gone, then we'll get Jesus. But Judas comes along and says, I can betray him to you. And so suddenly the fast-forward button is hit, and the plot accelerates where he is going to get taken sooner. So you've got the conspiracy of the leaders, and then you've got the betrayal of the insider. And those are bracketing this story. So all that darkness and intrigue, behind the scenes, money passing under the table, and in the middle of that, you've got this beautiful scene of this lady openly, lavishly giving her adoration and love to Jesus. Do you see how Mark is setting this off? It's kind of like when you look in a jewelry store and they're promoting like a diamond and a silver ring. What do they set it against? Black velvet, right behind it, because it sets it off. Shine the light on that one thing, and the darkness of the background makes it stand out all the more. And that's what Mark does here. In the midst of all this evil comes this wonderful, wonderful act of love. And that's where we're going to focus today, is on this act of love. Now, a little bit of background about this item that she has, this alabaster vial, it says, of perfume. Anybody ever used essential oils, okay, to diffuse in your house or to make things smell nice, okay? And essential oils, okay, are not essential. What it means is it's the essence of. So it's what this plant is or whatever condensed down into this really tiny oil, or this, this really concentrated oil. And we've got some of those in our house. I actually brought one, forgot to bring it in with me, okay? But you sniff one of those things, we're like, wow, that is powerful. But they don't come in like gallon jugs, all right? You buy these things in like half-ounce, quarter-ounce, little tiny containers, and when you see the price of them, you're like, good night. What is this stuff made from? Okay, that's what this is. Basically, it's an essential oil. It's produced from a plant that grows in the foothills of the Himalayas over in India or Nepal area. So if you think about it, before there was the transportation we have now, this came over a great long distance, long period of time, so it was really, really expensive. And she had about a pint of it. It's probably about 12 ounces that she had of this stuff. And it was worth 300 denarii, which is roughly a year's wages. Okay, to translate it into our terms. So this is a very, very expensive. Now, I have up on the screen here some pictures of some perfumes. Okay, so I'm going to show you a picture of a perfume, and I want you to just kind of guess how much you think this perfume is worth. Okay, so the first one here, this is called Bolt of Lightning. And I got these from I think it's called Wealth Gorilla, is a website where they detail all this. Okay, Bolt of Lightning, how much do you think that is? Okay, let's go ahead and put the price up there, Jerry. What do you see? $765 per ounce. All right? Pretty expensive stuff. But there's things that are more expensive. Caron Poivrier or something like that. Anybody speak French? I don't know how to say that. Okay, what's the price of this one? That one's $1,000 an ounce. Right? Let's take a look at it one more. Chanel. Now, you guys have heard of Coco Chanel, right? Okay? This is Grand Extrait All right, and what this one? This one's $4,200 an ounce. I don't want to break that bottle on accident. Okay, next one. Clive Christian #1 Imperial Majesty. What's this one worth? $12,722 an ounce. But that one pales in comparison to the #1 most expensive perfume of all time. Let's take a look at the next one. I don't know how you say that. Shamook. Okay. $1.29 million per ounce. Now, leave that picture up there for a second, because I want you to notice something about this. This is not just about the contents of the package. That's the bottle. Some of these bottles come encrusted with different jewels, diamonds, gold, silver, made out of crystal. It's not just the contents, but it's also the packaging that's important. Now, when you think of this lady had this nard, is what it's called, from this root, this essential oil, aromatic oil, and this thing was worth about a year's wages. Now, I don't know exactly how much that would be in comparison with us, because we're a relatively wealthy nation. But this was something that was rather extravagant. And the bystanders who were there knew this. Now, if you're taking notes, we're going to kind of walk through this in the sermon notes that you have. And what they cried out was waste. What a waste to use it like this. Now, we know from Matthew's gospel that this was actually the disciples who were saying this. Okay, in Matthew chapter 26, verses 8 and 9, we read, it says, "But the disciples were indignant when they saw this, and they said, 'Why this waste? For the perfume might have been sold for a high price, and the money given to the poor.'" Now, helping the poor is close to God's heart. We see that all through the Old Testament. We see in the New Testament, it seems that the disciples probably practiced this as a band of Jesus followers, that they would help the poor out of their resources. But they saw it as wasteful. Now, there are sometimes things that we might see that another person would give as a gift as being wasteful. Now, when I was single, I used to see that a guy gives his wife flowers, and I'm like, "You spent how much on dead plants?" Right? Now, I can imagine you ladies are rolling your eyes like, "Oh my goodness, really?" Because of the fact, yes, it might be a dead plant, but it is a beautiful dead plant. And you don't look at it from the perspective of what is the actual value of the item, but what is the value of it to the recipient of the item, right? So sometimes you have to look at a gift not based on just the monetary value, but how much is it worth to the recipient. Now, I've since learned, okay, flowers are worthwhile. That's a good thing to purchase, right? There is a deeper motive, though, behind this protest, at least with one of the disciples. Now, we see that multiple disciples, we don't know how many, if it was all of them, said this is wasteful. There would be a better use for this than just breaking this and pouring it over Jesus, because it could have been converted to food for the poor or clothing for the poor. This could have been a benevolent gift rather than just wasted. But one objector was concerned about something else, and that was Judas, and we see that he had want. He had want, and that comes in John chapter 12. John gives us some insight into this text that we don't get in the other two Gospels where it's recorded. And in John 12, verses 4 through 6, it says, "But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples who was intending to betray him, said, 'Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor people?' Now he said this not because he was concerned about the poor, but because he was a thief. And as he had the money box, he used to pilfer what was put into it." Judas was the treasurer, and he had his hand in the purse. He was taking from it, so when he saw this, he wasn't worried about the fact that it was wasted and not going to the poor. He was worried about the fact that it wasn't going to pass through his hands on its way to the poor, so that he could take some for himself. He was jealous. He was jealous of what Jesus was getting because he wanted it for himself. Now, a little bit of insight about Judas. We see what Judas does as being very bad, but why does he do it? There is another person or being pulling his strings. Luke 22, verses 2 through 5. "The chief priests and the scribes were seeking how they might put Jesus to death, for they were afraid of the people. And Satan entered into Judas, who was called Iscariot, belonging to the number of the 12, and he went away to discuss with the chief priests and officers how he might betray him to them." Satan was pulling Judas's strings. He was manipulating him. Now, obviously, he had to have access into Judas's life. Judas had to give him that access. It's not like he could just take him. But so there was this greed that was a part of Judas, and somehow that gave Satan access, or Satan got in there and caused these greedy desires to grow, and Judas gave into them. But this should not surprise us that when Satan gets into somebody's life, greed is the result. Jealousy and envy is a natural byproduct of Satan's influence in us. Now, this is going to get into a little bit of deeper theology here. It's going to be a short detour from what we're talking about, but I think it's helpful to understand this. In Isaiah chapter 14, we get some behind-the-scenes information about how Satan became Satan. Okay? Because Satan, we know, actually started out as an angel, a very highly exalted angel in heaven. He did not start out bad. He started out good. All right? But Isaiah chapter 14, I'm going to read you verses 12 through 14. Now, this is a taunt that is being given against the king of Babylon, but we can tell that it has a double meaning. There's more to it than just that. Isaiah 14:12. How you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn. You have been cut down to the earth, you who have weakened the nations. But you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit on the mount of assembly in the recesses of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. This is what's going on in Satan's heart before he fell, or when he fell. He was jealous. I see what God has. I think I deserve it. I want a piece of that. I want it for myself. Does that ring a bell with Judas? He sees this lavish outpouring on Jesus, and he's jealous. That could have been used for me. That could have been mine. He is envious of what God has that he wants for himself. He wants for himself what belongs to God. Now, this could be something that we could be tempted with. We're not going to develop this too much right now. But when you take and you are giving your tithes and your offerings, do you have a want for that? Do you gratefully surrender that, or is that kind of hard to let go of? Is it hard when you see, money in the plate for someone else, when you see something being given to God, someone's efforts and time being given to serving the Lord? It doesn't have to be just money. When you see something given to God, you think, boy, I wish I had that for myself. That was what was going on in Judas's heart. So there's the waste, and there's also the want. But that's not the perspective that Jesus has on it. He thinks of this as something else. Jesus sees this as worship. That's Jesus' interpretation of the action. This lavish outpouring of perfume that got poured on Jesus' head, and we also know on his feet, so potentially even his whole body. From the other Gospels, we get that. This was poured out on Jesus, and he sees it as an act of worship. Now, we don't use the term worship, but if we take a broad definition of worship, worship is honoring God for what he is worth and who he is. And that's certainly what this woman is doing. She's showing how worthwhile Jesus is. And Jesus specifically has 3 comments about this action that she has taken. The first is in verse 6, where it says, she has done a good deed to me. This is good, okay? She is an unnamed woman in Mark's gospel, anonymous. He talks about the action, but he doesn't identify who she is. Now, we know from John's gospel, though, that he defines who this is. This is Mary. Now, that doesn't narrow it down a whole lot in the Scripture. There's a lot of Marys. But it is Mary of Bethany, the sister of Martha, and the sister of Lazarus. So this is the Mary whose brother had just been raised from the dead by Jesus. So she is the one who is pouring this out. She has done a good deed to me. Well, what had God done? What had Jesus done for her? He had done a good deed for her too in raising her brother back to life. And I want to point out that this is a picture in and of itself of God's grace. We were talking about this in our family Bible time last night, that what we give to God is out of gratitude for what he has already given to us. Mary is not lavishing this expensive perfume on Jesus as a means of trying to get him to like her or to make herself acceptable. She's doing it out of what God has already given her. If we do our good deeds because of the fact we're trying to get God to like us enough, to make ourselves acceptable. God, would you please forgive me? And I'm going to show you how worthy I am of being forgiven. You got it totally backwards. What we do is we place our faith in Jesus. God forgives us, and then all the good that we do is done out of gratitude for what he has already given. Same way that she does here. She anoints Jesus seemingly out of gratitude. It doesn't say that in Mark's gospel here, but we know that she had to be very grateful for what Jesus had done in raising her brother to life. This two principles we take away from this comment from Jesus about her good. No act of worship is ever wasted. No act of worship is ever a waste. So what you give to the Lord, and this can be a monetary gift, a material gift, this can be the words of worship, it can be the time that you set aside to seek him in prayer, all of that is never a waste. What you give to others on his behalf. You know, Matthew talks about if you give a cup of cold water to one of these little ones, God sees it. He will reward it. Any act of service done to please God is an act of worship and is never wasted, no matter how big or how small. And if a gift, this is the second point about it being good, if it seems too lavish in our view, then our view of God is too small. If an act of worship seems too lavish, then our view of God is too small. The disciples, they should have understood who Jesus was, and lavishing this kind of gift on him was totally appropriate. But they seem to have missed that. They seem to have too low a view of Jesus to not understand that this was a good deed. Now, that's the first thing Jesus says, is that it's a good. The second he says is that it's timely. It's timely. In verse 7, you'll always have the poor with you, and you can do good to them whenever you want, but you will not always have me. There are some opportunities for worship that are time limited. You're never going to have that opportunity again. The person that you see that's in need and you can give them help, there might only be one opportunity to do that. When a missionary is being launched to the field and they need those startup costs to get there, that might be the only time that you can help. Some opportunities are time limited. Let's go ahead and go to Matthew 25. I wasn't sure if we're going to go there or not, but we're going to take a real quick look in Matthew 25 about this whole idea of time limited. Okay? Jesus says to those who have been welcomed into his kingdom, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." That's verses 35 and 36. And the people he's talking to are like, "What? I don't understand. When did we ever see you in these needy situations?" And Jesus says in verse 40, "Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, you did it to me." So when you serve somebody that Jesus loves, Jesus takes it personally. You just served me. You just gave to me. Thank you. But this is a time-limited opportunity because this is referring to the end of time at the judgment. And then if you jump down to verse 45, to those who didn't serve and give and love, he says, "Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." You missed your chance. You didn't serve, you didn't love, you didn't give when you had the opportunity. Take the opportunities for worship when they are available. So it was good and it was timely, but there's another element, and that is the fact that it was prophetic. What this lady did to Jesus was prophetic. One thing I did not ever realize before is that when she did this, why did she still have this oil? Okay, this could represent like life savings. I mean, sometimes people will take their money and they convert it to like gold or silver or something. Okay, it's a buffer against inflation and all this. This particular object might have been a family heirloom, the kind of thing that a woman would give for her dowry when she's getting married. This could be something that is saved for the day of her death. She didn't even use this when her brother died. She could have used this to anoint his body for burial, but she hadn't done it. And what she didn't give to her brother in his death, she gave to Jesus in his life. And it foreshadowed the fact that he was going to die. Now, there's kind of debate. Did she really understand? Because Jesus talks about, she did this for the day of my burial. Did she understand that or not? She may not have really fully understood it. Maybe she understood more than what we realize. But either way, there was a prophetic element to what she did that pointed forward to a reality that was yet to come. Jesus was going to die. Sometimes our acts of worship have more significance than what we realize at the time. It has a future, an end of time significance even to it. I want to read you a passage from Hebrews chapter 11. In Hebrews 11 is the Hall of Faith chapter, where it talks about all these people who have walked faithfully before the Lord. And in chapter 11, verses 13 to 16, after talking about Abel to Abraham and all these faithful people in there, it says, all these died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen them and welcomed them from a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. And if indeed they had been thinking of that country from which they went out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. They acted in faith here, not because this was their home, but because of the fact that they had another home coming. They were looking forward to something in the future. If we look forward to the fact that we have a reward coming, that God is going to give back to us way more than we have ever given to him, what are we going to do? We're going to give lavishly. You can't outgive God. He's got so much more in store for you, and they were looking forward to that. Now, to put it in a little bit more contemporary context for us, because that was looking backwards, but in 2 Peter chapter 3, he's talking about how the world is going to be destroyed, and starting in verse 11, he says this, since all things are to be destroyed in this way, what sort of people ought you to be in holiness, holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the day of God, because of which the heavens will be destroyed by burning, and the elements will melt with intense heat. But according to his promise, we're looking forward to a new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. Therefore, beloved, since you look for these things, be diligent to be found by him in peace, spotless and blameless, and regard the patience of our Lord as salvation. Since we look forward to something that is coming, what should we do now? Live a holy life, blameless in our conduct, and working for the coming of Jesus. It says hastening the day of God. And we know from Scripture that one of the things that hastens the day that Jesus is going to return is by telling others about him. Once every tongue, tribe, nation, and language has heard, all the nations of the earth have heard, then it says the end will come, and Jesus is going to come back. So what do we learn from this lady? Use what you have while you have it to worship when you can. Whatever you have in your possession, Jesus says she did what she could. There were things she might not be able to do, but what did she have? She had this. What could she do? She could lavishly give it all to Jesus. Break it open, spread it all over him. Are we taking what we have and giving it fully to him? Now, I want to close with a story. And I think this is a true story, although I did see one website that drew that into question. But this is about a man named William Borden. Now, this name may not sound familiar to you, but this logo might seem familiar. The Borden Milk Company, condensed milk, okay? William Borden grew up an heir to a great fortune. By the time he was in high school, he was a millionaire, which in the early 1800s was a lot of money, or 1900s was a lot of money. I got to say, just pausing right there, it's still a lot of money, okay? If anybody doesn't think it's a lot of money, I'll take yours, okay? He and his family assumed that he would one day take over the family business. So after he graduated from high school, before he was to enroll at Yale University, his family sent him on an around-the-world trip. He visited Egypt, Syria, China, Japan, and while he was traveling, God called him to spend the rest of his life as a missionary. His father told him to wait a few years before making any big decisions. A friend told him not to throw his life away. But Borden was so certain of God's call on his life that in the back of his Bible, he allegedly wrote these words, "No reserves." Borden went to Yale, where he organized weekly Bible studies and opened the first rescue mission in New Haven. During his freshman year, he went to a conference where he learned about millions of Chinese Muslims who were not served by any missionaries. And Borden decided he wanted to spend his life serving Muslims in China. Instead of taking over the family business after college, he enrolled at Princeton Theological Seminary. he would not be deterred from his calling. In the back of his Bible, under the words "no reserves," he is said to have written 2 more words: "no retreats." After graduating from Princeton Seminary, Borden said goodbye to his family and friends and set sail for China's Gansu province. He stopped in Egypt to learn Arabic and study Muslim customs so he could minister to them more effectively. But while in Egypt, he contracted cerebral meningitis. He died 19 years later at the age of 25. What a tragedy, you might think. What a shame that somebody who was willing to give up so much died even before he got to the mission field. But tracts about his testimony were distributed in several languages, and in 1914, China Inland Mission founded the Borden Memorial Hospital in the very province that he had been hoping to serve. Because of Borden's story, countless missionaries have been inspired to share the gospel around the world. And apparently I failed to print out the rest of that, but it is said that in the back of his Bible, somebody found after his death, that it said no reserves, no retreats, and it ended by saying no regrets. He gave it up, but he didn't miss it because of the fact that he knew that he had given it to God, the one who was worth it. So as we consider what we have been given, let's think of this example of Mary. She was incredibly grateful for what she had been given. She had been given her brother back. And she felt that this family heirloom, this thing that was her life savings, whatever value that was to her, Jesus was worth it. It was enough to give it all to him in a way that was without reserve. And she didn't seem to have any regret, too, as far as we know, as people started scolding her. And Jesus defended her and said, "She has done a good thing to me." What good thing might God want you to give and to do for him as an act of worship? Unreserved, fully surrendered to him. Think about that as we have this closing song. And as always, if you need prayer, I'll be down the front pew. You're welcome to slip in beside me.